The year is 2007 and Honda just manufactured the last of their two-stroke dirt bikes. No, they're not making two-strokes again, but that still begs the question, what would a 2023 Honda two-stroke look like? What's up guys, my name is Matt Berger, and in this multi-part series, we're gonna be taking this 2003 Honda CR250R and rebuilding it from the frame up to show us exactly what a new Honda two-stroke would look like if they're still being manufactured today. Do not let the restyle plastics fool you. This bike is in rough shape and is gonna need a lot of work. Now, lucky for us, it does start up and run. Not very well, but hey, at least we know what we're taking apart actually works to begin with. So let's dive right into this thing, rip all the plastics off, and start with step one of any build, the wash. All right, while I'm pressure washing years of neglect off this bike, let's take a closer look into the mess we've got ourselves into. Just because a bike has new plastics does not mean the rest of the bike is new or in good shape. Everything cosmetically on this thing is either rusty, covered in oil, or broken. The engine cases have been poorly painted. This air filter doesn't even look like it's been cleaned since 2003. I don't even know how this bike ran. It's got the wrong radiators, the silencer's all smashed in, both the front and rear suspension is shot and leaking oil everywhere. It runs horribly, the brakes suck, the bearings are all loose, and the list goes on and on. The time and effort that's gonna have to go into this bike is gonna be crazy, but I'm excited. I'm ready for it, and I cannot wait to transform this thing into something amazing. And I'm entering this build into the 2023 Broke to Built Bike Build Contest. I competed in 2020, I won the two-stroke and vintage classes in 2021, I was a judge in 2022, and I am back to win again in 2023. I've got an incredible vision for this bike that I'm excited to share and bring you guys along with me on this project. And as always, I'm gonna show you guys that you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to have a bike like this. If you shop smart and plan accordingly, you can have a bike that not only runs and works perfectly, but looks amazing as well for something realistically around like $5,000. And that's what we're gonna be doing with this build. $5,000, that's our budget. I think we can do it. Let's jump back into getting this bike cleaned up. I'm just spraying some degreaser all over everything. That way I can grab my brushes and start getting to work. What we're trying to do is just break down as much of that grease and grime as we can. I also like to use a simple green. It's a little bit heavier and stronger of a chemical. That way I can get in there with my smaller bristle brush and break down as much of that as we can. I like to do this on its side. It makes it a little bit easier. That way I can pop it up, throw it on its stand, give it one last pressure wash, and this bike is already looking a million times better. The more work you do when you're first washing it, the way better time you're gonna have when you bring it inside the shop and start getting into it. Now that we've got the bike cleaned up and rolled into the shop, it is time to start taking everything apart, and this is really where we're gonna figure out what else is broken and what else needs to be replaced that we didn't see right away. And it seems like we're off to a pretty good start, because when I pulled this pipe off, it had a ton of water in it. I had used the wash plug, so this was not for me. I have no idea how long that's been in there, but this is in the first 10 seconds of me taking this thing apart. I can't imagine what we're gonna find throughout this process. So let's go ahead and pop this rusty chain off. That's gonna be thrown away. We're gonna be replacing all the chain and sprockets on this build. Moving on to the subframe, airbox, and air boot assembly. Everything looked to be actually in really good shape, just dirty, so that'll clean up really nice. Next, we're gonna be draining the radiator fluid, the coolant out of this bike, because these radiators are just not right. The angle was wrong on them, the bolt holes on the shrouds, nothing lined up right, so I don't know what these were for, but they're gonna be coming off and not going back on again. Moving up to the cockpit area, we're gonna be taking all this stuff apart. The red bars were actually in really good shape, but they're not gonna go with the vision that I have for this bike, so we're actually gonna pop those off, set them aside in case we need them for another build. This eBay lever, this thing has got to go, but these triple clamps actually have these oversized bar mounts, which are really nice. These will come in handy later in the build. These Honda 250s have a ton of electrical connections, different rectifiers, CDI boxes, you name it. So I made sure to just take note of any of the connections that I took apart. Moving on to removing the wheels. This is where the fun began. As you can see, I'm already struggling just to remove the front wheel of the bike. Everything on this bike is just crusty, over tightened, neglected, and just hard to get off. So the rear wheel was even worse. I could not get this axle to budge at all. I tried with just a rubber mallet. I switched to a 5-pound sledgehammer. I even went to a 20-pound sledgehammer just beating on this thing. Could not get it. So took a break, went up to the front of the bike to start working on some other stuff. I even had a hard time getting the triple clamps loosened to get the forks out of the bike, but eventually I was able to finally get those off. So I stayed towards the front of the motorcycle and just continued to work on getting these triple clamps all the way off, which gave me a great opportunity to get the bearing off of the lower triple clamps and get the bearing races out of the frame. I'm using this Park Tool bearing race removal tool. This thing's pretty sweet. I even sent one of these flying across the shop. I then moved back over to the workbench. That way I was able to clamp this thing down and work this bearing off just using a combination of different chisels and punches and a hammer to just keep knocking this thing all the way off. It's kind of pressed on there. Sometimes it can be a little annoying and frustrating, but this time it wasn't too bad. So after about an hour and a half of working with this thing with PB Blaster and wrenches and different hammers, I was finally able to hit this thing out of here, get the axle free, and get the rear wheel off of this bike. That was a complete nightmare, not fun at all, but hey, it is what it is. But we're going to go ahead and rip these tires off of these wheels. We're going to be replacing these anyways. The rims are actually both damaged front and rear, so this is going to be pretty much a complete overhaul on the wheels for this build. So now that that nightmare is over, we can work on starting to get this motor pulled out of the frame. And as you guys saw earlier, the bike started up just fine. It didn't run real good, but at least we knew that it works. All the electrical connections were good. That way, when we put this thing back together, we know it should fire right up. So I was able to get all these connections and these motor mounts pulled off, and they weren't as crusty and as hard to get off as I thought they were going to be. We were able to get the rear brake off. That way we can get this, rear shock and swing arm pulled off of this bike. I was a little bit worried about that main swing arm bolt right in between the motor and the frame, but that wasn't too bad. That popped right off and allowed us to get this motor right out of the frame. And last but not least, we can pop these foot pegs off and we are left with pretty much a barren frame. Now that we've got the bike stripped all the way down to the frame, I thought to myself, there's nothing else that's going to be that hard to take apart. I mean, what could be worse than trying to take off that rear wheel? Linkage. Linkage was worse than trying to get that rear wheel off, like 10 times worse. I enlisted the help of my dad, and over the next 2.5 hours, we tried everything to try to get this bolt off, and we could not get it. I mean, we tried heat, we tried beating this thing out of here, we created these custom wood bracing pieces. You name it, we tried it. We had the electric impact, we had the air impact, PB Blaster, and finally we were able to get it set up over at the shop press. We ruined countless little pieces, but after 2.5 hours, we were finally able to get it to budge.
What's going on? No way.
Man, what a victory that was when we finally pulled that bolt out of there. Wow. And here we are. The bike is completely torn down to the frame. We've got it all laid out here and we are ready for the next stage of this build. I hope you guys liked this video. If you want to see more videos from me, make sure to click right here on the screen to check out my other build series. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one.